Welcome, everybody. Today, we'll be starting our latest episode of the Orchestration Kitchen. And today, we're going to be talking about how to protect notoriously difficult to protect apps, those LDAP apps, with modern authentication. I'll be your host today, Mark Callahan. And joining me, Chef Terry Cozard from the Strata Solutions Engineering team. And let's take a look at how we're going to be tackling things today. So just as we do on every Orchestration Kitchen, the name of the game is really tackling those spicy challenges that people are facing. And we often hear that, how do I protect an LDAP application? And so as we get into this, Chef Terry, what are some of the agenda things that we'll be discussing today that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Mark. Really, we're going to do a quick introduction as to what identity orchestration is, at least in our perspective, and certainly go speak about how we think we're different and how we can solve these problems in a unique and scalable way for our customers. Then we're going to actually look a little bit deeper into the LDAP applications themselves, because they tend to be, there's a lot of variety in how the applications are built, how they behave, and that leads to the complexity that a lot of people have with these organizations. Next, we're going to whiteboard it and actually demonstrate in kind of a quick and dirty way about how one can do these kind of patterns. And then I'm going to cook with the recipe. We're going to actually make it together. So we're going to show you both the before picture of what the application natively looks like. It still has the login form. It didn't go away, but we're just going to go ahead and automate it in favor of whatever is best. So that's kind of the flow that we're going to go through today for everyone, Mark.
That sounds great. Well, we've got a bunch of identity foodies on the line with us today as we're getting into this. And so let's start off with the ingredients. As we look across the baseline of everything that we're going to need to cook with today, let's start with identity orchestration. So what really is identity orchestration?
Great question. So let me go ahead and bring up a little infographic about that. So the way that Strata has pioneered the identity orchestration world is we really allow you to sit within the user journey to any given application that you have. And what that allows us to do is abstract away all of the common identity related functions. At Strata, everybody that works here has been doing this for decades. Some of our founders actually wrote the SAML specification. And so we are deeply steeped in all of these technologies, but the orchestration allows you to say, regardless of if this application is new or old, like the LDAP-based applications that we're talking about today, you can then use modern authentication. You can use modern access control capabilities. If you want to have multi-factor enforced in front of the application, super easy. In fact, one of the patterns that we see a lot for these applications that have their own login form is sometimes you have to get MFA in front of them, but it may not even have an LDAP behind it. It may have something unique to the application itself, but modern standards require that you have your users do some kind of step-up authentication. We can do those things trivially for you. But we can do it also for the other elements. We can go get information where it natively wants to reside about your users. We can then bundle all that up to an authorization server, something like an Axiomatics or Plain ID or OPA or whatever it is that's interesting to your organization before we let you get to the application itself. But really what makes us very unique and different is in the lower right-hand corner of this, where we sit natively in front of the application, be that as a proxy sometimes not, but we can actually sit in front of the application so that we can modernize everything on the left of this slide before we translate that into a way the application natively wants to understand it. So in this case, we've got an application that has its own native login form. That's just how it was built, which is fine. But we then can do all of the modern authentication, conditional access checks. And then when it's time, that sub-second before you get into the application, we'll actually replay things into the application from the server side. We don't require browser extensions or any of those things that make it hard for people to deploy at a scalable manner to all of their customers and employees and everybody else. We do it at the server side to make it as simple and as secure as we possibly could.
And so without burying the lead, but getting back to like kind of the exciting thing that's taking place here is I see a little text over on the right, no change to the application. That's so right. What we're talking about doing today, everything is going to happen without any changes to that application, which is especially important as we think about what might be termed a fragile LDAP app or something that people don't have access to the source code, or, it's been 20 years since they know who actually created the application itself.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mike. And so, Mark, so one of the things that makes us really unique in how we do it is that because this orchestration engine is so flexible, we actually can look like a virtual directory to the application itself. So the only thing that needs to get changed from that application is right now it's pointed to the directory that it was originally deployed on. And then you just point it to us instead. And then we do the authentication. We go source the attributes, and then we bundle it back up so that the application doesn't know that the initial LDAP server that it used to talk to went away.
And so as we think about, we talked about LDAP apps being, why they're unique and they're older. In previous episodes, we've actually talked about the fact that there's, always these legacy apps or non-standard applications, those that don't speak modern identity protocols. LDAP apps are even a little bit different than that. They're a bit thornier in that, like, we hear apps are LDAP-bound. I mean, that sounds forceful. That sounds severe. Like, what's the difference between some of those traditional legacy app patterns that we've heard in an LDAP-bound application?
Great question. So there is a lot of variability in the way LDAP gets deployed. And LDAP's been around for, forever, decades and decades and decades. And it was built on a standard that is even older. So although it's been around for a long time, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Sometimes when a user logs into something and it goes back to an LDAP in the backend, it just logs in as the end user and just says, is the password okay? And then you're off to the races. Others do a little more unique things. It comes in as an administrator user, and then it queries additional information. And so there's all kinds of different patterns within the LDAP specification that are unique to each application. So there's really no one size fits all as it relates to LDAP applications, but these are patterns that we see all the time, and we can easily help you with that. And in some cases, depending on how tightly bound the application is to the LDAP, we can turn off the LDAP afterwards.
Oh, that's interesting. So, as we think about this, so as we look at the diagram here, the LDAP store is actually a hard-coded database of usernames, passwords, and potentially more user information, not just the username and password credential pair. There might be other information in there that we may, yes, or may not want to maintain.
That's exactly right. And we do talk to a lot of people that say, we would love to be able to turn off that LDAP entirely. We can't always do it. A lot of that depends, again, on how the application was built. Sometimes it's just inextricably linked to that. But in many cases, we can say, great, as long as we can get the data that the application needs from somewhere, we can make it look like LDAP calls to the application itself.
Well, let's take a look at how we're going to do that. So we've got a nice little diagram here, which is probably one of the more basic ones we've seen so far, but it's this LDAP, legacy app in the before state. So why don't we wireframe or talk through how the recipe is going to take place?
Yeah, great. Let's do that. So here, this is the before picture. This is before Strata gets into the picture. It's exactly as you would expect. The application itself is hosted wherever and however it is in the world. And then it has a back channel communication with your LDAP server. And so we're really a clean architecture, but it's hard to scale. And it's certainly hard to modernize if you want additional modern capabilities. So where we come in is we then allow you to sit in line. Now, the orchestrator is important to understand. We can either sit upstream in the network as a user is trying to get access to this application, or we're so teeny tiny, we could be deployed on the application itself without really any headroom. We're a very, very light service that runs there. And what happens when we are sitting in line of this user experience, we then have the flexibility to do all those abstractions that I talked about earlier. We can kick you out to Entra, Okta, Hyper, ForgeRock. It doesn't really matter where your authentication source is. You can just leave it where your organizational standard is, or you could have multiples. You could say, we just acquired a company and they authenticate this way, and then the traditional employees or customers authenticate the way they used to. We have lots of flexibility there. But then one of the things that we do very uniquely is that we then have a back channel communication instead of from the application to the LDAP. It comes back to us. We are both the front end of this process in terms of making sure you've authenticated properly and got authorization, MFA, all those kinds of things. But then we're the back end LDAP as well. So it's a very unique architecture in how we've built this. But what that allows you to do is then you can use modern authentication sources, or you can stay modern in terms of the next things that are coming down the road. A lot of people are interested in the upcoming standards that are coming into the industry, things like continuous access evaluation, things like passkeys, things like webhooks, or whatever bespoke logic that may be important for your organization to properly protect these things. We can do all those things natively. And the important thing there is you don't have to revisit this application again. The fabric just knows how to do those things.
This is great. And you briefly touched on it, and I want to draw a little extra attention to this, is the fact that in the before state, there was a, a hard-coded username and password credential pair. What we're talking about now is, from an administrator's perspective, some really slick things that are happening. But from the users, the end user's perspective, I'm going to have a consistent login experience now that where I don't have to keep a separate username and password for those one or two applications that don't already sit behind Okta. So there's one or two apps that are LDAP-bound. Today, we know from our customers that all of their employee users, workforce, partners, customers, they have to keep a separate set of credentials to get access to those. What we're proposing is a common access path to what they expect.
That's exactly right. And so the beauty here is that you can do this and you can deploy it instantaneously to your customers, your workforce, your business partners, without asking them to install something on their browser, which in many organizations, certainly those that are very security conscious, won't allow in the first place. We do that without any of those extensions. We do it natively in the way the application expects to be communicated with. But then we keep that same user experience. We keep that same consistency of security policy that you already have built in your modern infrastructure.
That's great. And we're doing all this without giving up the complexity that we may have built policy-wise into the LDAP apps themselves. So we're not having to forego any of the authorization or authentication policies that they had set. And it's again, everyone kind of wins in this scenario. It's great, and I think as we talk to customers and as we've heard in the field, sometimes those LDAP apps in a migration event are some of the last ones to go over because they do seem so thorny. They seem so complex, so fragile. I can't touch it. I'm afraid of it. What we're proposing here is that there's no app left behind. You're worried about cyber insurance. You need to have 100% coverage of MFA and phishing resistant modern authentication across all of your apps. If you leave just the LDAP apps unprotected, all your apps are basically unprotected. So what we're proposing here is a path to protecting 100% of your apps, especially some of the hardest ones being these LDAP apps.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we want to make these applications first-class citizens. It's not uncommon for me to have conversations with people, and you talk to the identity team, and they just don't even pay much attention to these applications because before Strata, you couldn't do anything with them. They were unprotectable in most modern environments without rewriting the application or doing really some kind of unnatural act. And so what we allow you to do is make them first-class citizens in your organization so they get protected in the exact same way you want all of your other applications protected.
Well, this is great. Tell you what, without further ado, we've seen how simple we suggest it's going to be. Let's take a look at actually cooking. Time to jump into the kitchen and actually get cooking.
You bet. So let me go ahead and segue into that actual live demonstration here. Going to the wrong browser, my apologies. So here we've got an application today that, as you see, it has its own native login form. And this is just how the application was built. If I were to go ahead and put in a username and password here, it would go directly to the LDAP as you would expect, kind of in that before picture. But what we've done now is we're actually going to have our orchestrator sit in front of it. So now I'm routing through our proxy. Doesn't matter if that proxy natively exists on the web server or upstream. We're pretty happy either way. But by policy, we're going to say we're going to redirect you to enter ID for authentications to make sure that you are indeed who you say you are. and then we sign in. And now what we have the ability to do is we natively get into the application. I know these types of demonstrations go awfully quickly, but there's really a lot of things that went on in the background to make this successful. Certainly, we sat in the policy and the user journey so that we authenticated the user properly. But when it came time to that last sub-second where the user actually needs to get into the application, they don't even see the web form anymore. They don't see any credentials getting injected because it's all done by us. We do that at the orchestration layer, so the user doesn't even know that any of this happens. And more importantly, the application doesn't know either. So we can make it much, much, much simpler to adopt these applications into your modern infrastructure.
Interesting. And actually, this is a great point. Ira just asked a question about how do you, we talked about, I guess, the other attributes that might be in LDAP. How do you bring in other user attributes from LDAP?
Great question. So that's one of the native benefits of the orchestration fabric is that since we abstract away everything, we don't have to go, if the information that's necessary for the application to work well doesn't exist in your identity provider, it exists in your HR platform or a directory somewhere else or a database or wherever it naturally wants to live. We just go get it at the sub-second that it's needed. We bundle that up, and then we give it to the application in the way that it expects it. Sometimes that application might expect it in the form of a header, maybe all kinds of different ways. There's lots of different patterns for applications to do those things. In this pattern, it's probably going to come back with the application says, now I know I've got a user that is authenticated and authorized. Let's learn more about them, about group memberships or roles or attributes or whatever it may be. And then through that LDAP channel, they'll query our orchestration engine, and we'll go get the information wherever it natively wants to exist. Great question, Ira. Thank you.
That's great. So that then I see what we're saying there is this may not always be a deprecation story where you're completely getting rid of LDAP. You may actually still maintain it for these additional bits of information.
That's really up to our customer for that. You know, we're kind of fond that we're not in the business of telling anybody how to do their business. If they want to deprecate it, certainly we'd explore that conversation and help. If they don't want to, fantastic. Let it endure. That's perfect.
Great. Well, earlier we were talking about protecting these LDAP applications, and kind of the general assumption, and as we described in the intro, was how do you protect an LDAP app with your favorite cloud IDP, your favorite modern IDP that you're using. Sometimes people are looking to add MFA, passkeys, passwordless to these legacy apps as well. That's just as simple as the flow we just witnessed.
It's actually even easier, Mark. So what we can do in that pattern is sometimes you don't want single sign-on into an application. We actually just have a customer that just joined up with us, and they have an application that is accessed by their employees, by their customers, and by business partners all together. And it would be unfeasible, at least for that organization, to put all of those identities in their identity provider because it's spanning so many different groups. So we can actually just sit in front of that application. And once we know the user has successfully logged into the application, then we can trigger a multi-factor authentication event. Maybe that's an SMS message. That could be an email one-time password token. That could be all kinds of different patterns based on what the organization uniquely needs. But the idea here is that you can quickly, easily, and surgically modernize those and satisfy those needs for MFA across all of your applications.
Well, so in the topic of easily, Aaron just asked a question about why not just solve this with a plugin?
Well, a lot of reasons why not solve this with a plugin, because if you're talking about a server-side plugin, they generally don't exist for this type of an application pattern. This application, keep in mind, was written a long time ago and oftentimes is running on infrastructure that's may not even be supported for a lot of organizations. But because the LDAP standard has been around for so long, it continues to hum along just as it always has. So it's really difficult with a plugin-based approach to do this on the server side. There are approaches in the industry where you can actually have every one of your users install a browser plugin and those kinds of things. And then the browser plugin will go ahead and force your username and password in there. But those tend to be fraught with challenges. Certainly, there's version changes as a user may be behind or current on their browsers if the plugin doesn't stay in contact. There's also some legitimate security questions about having the end user's password getting passed in that channel as well. We bypass all of that. So we're natively working with the application in the way that it was built and designed to do, so that you can much more quickly and easily do that without having to go with those kind of legacy fraught with risk patterns.
And that makes sense. And Aaron, I saw he mentioned at the end user side plugins. So hopefully that addressed that. And I think Terry, on the wireframes, you showed an illustration where we talked about future capabilities, right? Mm-hmm. There's potentially CAE and whatever the next biggest thing in identity is. These wouldn't be possible with a browser side plugin either. So what we're suggesting here is you get all the benefits of identity orchestration now, but also going forward. This isn't just a benefit today. This is a future proofing.
That's exactly right. It's been my experience. I've been in this industry for a little bit now, and there's a new standard, a new technology, a new thing that comes out roughly every 2 to 4 years. And so what the additional benefit of an orchestrated approach is that we future-proof all of the applications that we protect for whatever comes next. Other things that are important to consider there is what happens if you acquire a different company? What happens if you divest a different company? And those kinds of things, you multiply that problem out there. Orchestration is a really great way to do that, because we can have multiple different identity providers protecting this legacy application. We could have multiple different types of MFA being enforced based on your user type or where you're going in the application or those kinds of things. So we really give you flexibility that it greatly exceeds what you're familiar with.
I love it. And we've had a number of conversations with analysts recently who have been talking about the importance of flexible identity posture for that very reason. And so I think, we led off today's episode talking about the supposed or implied fragility of an LDAP-bound application, that it's too complex to touch, just can't do anything with it. And I think what we've landed on here is that you can actually keep it permanently flexible and forever modern. It really is able to do all these things. And once again, without changing the application.
Yeah, it really is kind of a too good to be true kind of sounding story. But the reality is we do this all the time for our customers. We really thoughtfully came to the market about how do we solve these really challenging issues for our customers and do that in the simplest way that we can imagine doing it. And so, as I started out the call with, LDAP applications tend to be very nuanced and things like that. So I'm confident we can solve any of the patterns that are out there, but these take a little more thought than some of the other base patterns that we've built our Orchestration Kitchen episodes on previously. Nonetheless, we can solve it. Love to talk to you.
I was going to say, that sounds like an invitation. I think as we wrap up today's episode, we would invite our audience. We appreciate you all joining us for this episode, future episodes, past episodes. Keep in mind that all of these are always available in recorded format. So be sure to check out the Orchestration Hub for past episodes, as well as to see what's coming up next. And how about for folks who are really eager to, we said it's too good to be true. How about folks who really want to just get their hands on it and start cooking today, Terry? What do you suggest?
I love it. If you're somebody who just wants to get your hands dirty and just get into solving problems, go to mavericks.strata.io, sign up for our trial. The orchestration for an LDAP-based application, as I've mentioned, requires a little more thought and introspection on it. We're happy to shepherd you through that, or walk you through, or at least guide you as to what questions you might be considering when you're looking to do that. So if you want those questions, or if you just want to see what orchestration is and how it may benefit you, please feel free to just go sign up on your own. If you do have any questions or want a one-on-one session, please reach out to me directly. My email address is terry@strata.io. Would be more than happy to talk to anybody about these things.
Well, this is great. Well, today, this was one of the spicier recipes that we've cooked up to date. And here we walk away with a nice, clean solution. And it's just exciting to be able to do these together with you, Chef Cozart. So thank you very much for spending your time with us. And our audience, thank you for spending your time with us to hear what we had to share. As Terry mentioned, feel free to reach out, get your hands dirty right now. Take a look at what is coming up next in terms of the episodes. And with that, we'd like to bid everyone adieu. Have a wonderful afternoon.